City Center Radio. It is episode 316, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024. Hey everyone, hope you are having a good week so far. This is the Wednesday show. It may come out a little earlier than that. We'll see what happens. That's not the normal routine here, so you may be hearing this a day early. But whenever you're listening, it's a great conversation I have today. Very important. They're talking about an event that's being held this Thursday, which I'll get to in a moment. But even if the event is passed, this conversation is not so much about the event itself. And I think it's really important and interesting, and I think you would really enjoy it, especially since this is a topic that affects a lot of people. So my guests today are, I have two actually, which is exciting. Sam Quinones, who is a journalist, formerly of the LA Times, amongst other publications, now a freelancer. He's also the author of 4 acclaimed books that are all nonfiction. Some links to those books are in the show notes, so if any of them sound interesting to you, you go ahead and click on over and you can purchase them online or go to a local bookstore and see if they have them. The most recent book is The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth, which was released in 2021. He also had a book that came out in 2015 called Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. And as I mentioned, he's an acclaimed author because both of these books received high praise. The Least of Us in January of 2022 was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award for Best Nonfiction Book of 2021, while Dreamland won a National Book Critics Circle Award for Best Nonfiction Book of 2015. He has several other accolades and just great feedback, reviews, and things of that nature for these books. And it was an honor to be able to speak with him today. He is going to be a guest speaker at an event happening this Thursday. That's the 8th annual Giving Breakfast, which will be held at the Cooper River Room at Mount Pleasant's Waterfront Park. It starts at 8 a.m. This is an event that's being held by Wake Up Carolina. You may have heard that name before. They aim to provide a safe place for our community to come together and provide hope, raise awareness, and facilitate recovery for Charleston's youth, young adults, and their families. Basically, they are here and trying to address the rising substance misuse among our youth, specifically here in the Charleston area, but they are expanding out. The guest who is here on behalf of that organization is Dean Stevens, a friend of mine. He used to be an anchor at ABC News 4. He's gone on now to become the Business Development Director and Berkeley County Director for Wake Up Carolina. He'll tell you more about that organization, what exactly they do, and more about this event. Sam, obviously, being the keynote speaker, that's why he'll be here today, and he'll also be discussing his books and specifically what those books covered, what he has learned about, addiction in this country as it relates to several drugs that unfortunately are really gripping every state, every community. Yes, I'm sure you know someone, whether it's directly in your family or not, that suffers from addiction, and specifically for addiction to some of these, just really horrific drugs that we have learned more about over, the last handful of years. Opiates, whether prescribed or not, heroin, fentanyl, and on and on. So it's a conversation that I think affects everyone. You know someone, again, whether you're very close to that person or not, that is affected by this. So without any further delay, let's get into the interview. It's a very good one, and I was so appreciative of both of these gentlemen taking time to chat about it. And joining me now, as promised, 2 amazing guests, Dean Stevens and Sam Quinones. Very excited to have you both here today. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Christian.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. So what we'll do first is just so folks know a little bit more about you before we dive into Wake Up Carolina and the event that's coming up. If each of you could just give a little background about yourself, as much or as little as you want to share, just something so people know a little bit more about you, and whoever would like to go first can go right ahead.
Sam, I'll leave it up to you. You're the out-of-town guest.
Sure. Thanks very much, Christian. Really appreciate your interest in all this. I'm a reporter, 37 years in the business, written 4 books of nonfiction. The last 2 books have been about broadly speaking, the opioid epidemic in America. First, the widespread prescribing of narcotic prescription painkillers on the by doctors, pushed by pharmaceutical companies, and that leading to a brand new population of opioid addicted Americans, some of whom then switched to heroin. That was my book, Dreamland, came out in 2015. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, put out a book called The Least of Us, which is about the transition that we went through as a country, due largely to decisions made and evolution made down in Mexico toward synthetic drugs. These are drugs made only with chemicals, no plants involved. And the main examples of those are fentanyl and methamphetamine, which really now are nationwide and all up and down the eastern seaboard as well. And it's really a book about that, what that phenomenon means for the country, and some ideas about how we go about combating it.
Very nice indeed.
Sure. Dean Stevens moved here in 1990 to Charleston, working at Channel 4, covered sports for 15 years, and then jumped over and was the main news anchor for, another 16, where I had the privilege and the honor to welcome a Friday guest by the name of Holy City Sinner, who went through some of the upcoming weekend events and just kind of starting out on this journey, which has just blossomed and taken off. And just so proud of you, my guy.
No, thank you.
And just always had a lot of respect for your openness and your honesty with things going on in your life. And we have that mutual respect of the Dave Matthews Band, and there just was a lot that you and I shared. And so, when I left the TV world, I went for a nonprofit, and then I was doing some client videos for a law firm. And about this time a year ago, Nancy Stedman Shipman, who started Wake Up Carolina 8 years ago, following the overdose death of her son Creighton, who was a year out of Wando. He graduated high school with my oldest son. And then she and I had done a story 8 years ago, a couple months after Creighton died, and just kind of walked the walk with her a little bit from a professional side of things, doing stories whenever they needed it. I was open with, my recovery with her. So, I understood that part of the story. And then having kids who had gone through trauma, I understood that. Nothing like losing a child, and I just was always blown away by her honesty, and then by her commitment to this promise that her family made to Creighton in the hospital room the day he passed. And that was that no family and no person would ever have to take this walk alone. And it was very simple as it started. And so, watching her grow with the community and collaboration and partnerships and everything she's been able to do, she came to me a year ago and asked me if I would come work with them and help open up a new space in Berkeley County. And so my answer was simply, when do you want me to start? And so we opened up this space in Berkeley County because there was no kind of services we provide, nothing like it in this county. It's the largest county in the state. So we've got an office set up in Monk's Corner on Main Street. And, over the last 8 or 9 months, we've been able to establish 9 or 6 support groups a week, from, a mother's gathering, dad's groups, sibling group. We have an all veteran support group now. We do an all recovery kind of meeting. And then we also have a grief and loss support group for family and friends who have lost someone to a substance. And so that's the story. And once a year we do a giving breakfast, and this is the 8th year, which, if you think about it, man, 8 years holding space for people, and we couldn't have done it without community. And then the big word is trust. The community trust, and then the trust that we have in our partnerships with, Mount Pleasant Police Department in the town, and everybody here in Berkeley County as well.
First, thanks for the kind words. It was always a blast being on the air with you back several years ago, and yeah, I appreciate your friendship. And we've talked about not just music and sports and all that, but life and recovery. And you've always been involved in other organizations or events that revolve around recovery. And it's no surprise that you've ended up with this organization, and it's been amazing to see how much it's grown over the last 8 years. And you kind of just went through that process and the different things and how it's grown. But in addition to support meetings, uh, tell me a little bit more about Wake Up Carolina. There's some other things you do in the community as well, besides just those support meetings, which of course are important, but you do more than that
Yeah.
as well.
So we do, I think the biggest thing to point out is that, we do harm reduction measures. So what does that look like is that, we are a distributor of Narcan and fentanyl test strips and xylazine test strips. And, so we'll do trainings wherever people need us to go. Back in July, we just did a pop-up and went around Charleston and Berkeley County, just handed it out at various spots, and especially in Berkeley County where, there's part of the county it takes, you know, first responders a while to get there because it's so spread out and they had no services like this. And we were literally, people were weeping when we were giving it out because they had lost a loved one. And, so those three things are huge. And, we shared, I presented at a high school last year, and I tell the high school students, I go, if you need it, right, we have it. And that afternoon after school, 3 students came by to pick up Narcan, and so
Wow.
you and I have talked about the ripple effect, and what Mother Teresa said was, I'm not strong enough to change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. And I feel like we do that every day. And the ripples that sometimes you'll never see come back, but you know that they're impacting people down the road. And that's what we try to do, every day when people come in and either they're looking for treatment suggestions or detox or whatever it is, right? Or a support for a loved one who's passed. And our answer is we may not have the answer for you, but I'm going to get back to you by the end of the day, right?
Hmm.
Because I go back to that promise is I'm never going to let you walk alone ever. And that's how
And
the organization feels as well.
this Thursday, the 21st, is that 8th annual Giving Breakfast you mentioned. It's at 8 a.m. in the Cooper River Room at Mount Pleasant's Waterfront Park. Tickets are available now at wakeupcarolina.org. And Sam, of course, you are going to be the guest speaker at that event, which is why we have you here today.
That's right.
Now, you mentioned the books and the work you've done in this field of, recovery and, different types of drugs, opioids, fentanyl, et cetera. Was something specific? Did something specific draw you to that topic? How did this become something that you've been working on over several years in multiple outlets?
Well, I've been a journalist for a long time. I lived in Mexico for many years, 10 years down there, wrote 2 books then. Came back to the United States to work for the LA Times in Los Angeles, which is kind of where I grew up, where my hometown paper kind of. And it was there that I came upon this idea that we were seeing this real big uptick in heroin seizures at the border. This would have been about 2009 or 10, right in there, and I could not explain that. And as a journalist, when you have a story like that hits you, like, why is that, and what's going on? It really behooves you to pursue that question and what's going on there. Let me understand that better. And as time went on, I began to realize that we were in the middle of an enormous new surge in heroin, but that was even the smaller story. The bigger story was this revolution in the opioid revolution in pain management in American medicine, which held that we were not using enough opioids, meaning cousins to the opium poppy, basically drugs that derive from that eventually, and that this was because the medicine in America didn't really understand these drugs and all that. It was a time of enormous delusion, I felt, and pushed largely by pharmaceutical companies. And I began to realize that this was nationwide. I had missed it entirely because I was living in Mexico when all this was going on. And if it didn't have to do with Mexico, I didn't really pay any attention. And down in Mexico, it was only recently that they had discovered this. Most of the time, drug traffickers in Mexico really preferred to avoid heroin. It was not a big market. It was kind of viewed as a scuzzy drug. So I began to write about that. And then I wrote my book Dreamland, that basically told the complete narrative of what happened, how we got into this nationwide problem of overprescribing of prescription pain pills. As part of that, I began to get enormous numbers of invitations to come speak, like I'll be doing in Charleston on Thursday morning. And that was a remarkable idea, because when I was doing the book, when I was writing Dreamland, I was struck by how few people actually wanted to speak about this. People with addicted loved ones really did not want to speak about it. They did not want to be quoted or on record or anything like that. And it was very, very difficult to write that book, because the main people who could tell the poignant stories weren't there. We didn't want to be quoted. And as that book came out, and as more and more people kind of called me and emailed me to come speak and so on, I began to realize that the story itself was changing. And this would have been 2017, 18, 19, right in there. And you began to see the spread now of the reduction in opioid painkillers, the prescription pills and so on, from doctors being less a part of the supply. And increasingly, that was taken over by fentanyl, illicit fentanyl and methamphetamine coming out of Mexico from the drug trafficking world down there. So I was watching this almost like in real time, and I realized it was a national story, because by the end of that, by 2020, by the time COVID happened, those two drugs were essentially nationwide. They were all over the country, which was itself an amazing idea, because normally, for years, decades now, drugs have had very regional stories. Like one area will have a very different drug use story than, say, another area 500 miles away. Well, now that's not the case. So what's happening in Charleston is also true in Oklahoma and Oregon and California, varying degrees of intensity, but the story kind of remains the same. And so it was a journalistic inquisitiveness and curiosity that got me into that. And then I couldn't avoid the next book, The Least of Us, was about fentanyl and methamphetamine, setting that up as the major issue that we now deal with as a country. The rest of the book, more than half the book, though, is about the response, which is about community response, small scale, working together, defeating that real fragmentation and isolation that has become such a big part of American life and culture in the last, say, 40 years or so, something like that. And that this was the, trying to repair or strengthen community was kind of the way we get at this problem that is now all across the country. There was no magic answer to how we defeat it. It's simply a way of moving forward, repairing those community connections and moving forward in daily small scale steps, things that don't make the evening news so easily, but that through that is how we move forward against this very real scourge.
And in that same vein of moving forward and kind of going back to what you said about people not wanting to put their name or their loved one's name, on the record for, previous, whether it was books, articles, etc. Have you noticed a change where more people are willing to speak out now? Is that stigma still very much there?
Without a doubt. In fact, I consider it one of the great, what would you call it? It's not really a political movement, but it has a political effect. One of the great grassroots movements of our time, except for nobody notice it because there's no association, there's no press secretary, there's no president. It's just people coming out of the shadows into the light. And I began to see this very strongly as I was going around speaking. I would see people, I'd be hugging people all the time. People come up and tell me just powerful stories of their sister or their uncle or what have you. It was just powerful. And this was what I was definitely not hearing, not seeing at all when I was writing the book. It was like a nationwide silence, and all of a sudden, speech to speech to speech, I would hear people come out of the shadows. And I think that is a major reason why we've seen so much change surrounding this. When I turned my book in, Dreamland, there were no lawsuits. There were no active lawsuits against drug companies. Within a few years, there was, of the book, it was like 200, 300, 400, then pretty soon thousands. I think 3,000 was the final figure. Nobody knew how to pronounce the word naloxone. I had to put the word opiate, True Tale of America's opiate epidemic, in the subtitle to Dreamland because nobody knew what an opioid was. And
Mm.
more than that, it's like people began to hear stories around them. And stories are the way human beings have a change of mind, change of heart. When you hear stories, when you can feel another human being as part of that story, that almost always is the way we have changed our minds. And that's what began to happen as more and more of those people. I saw it definitely after the book came out. It was remarkable. So many people began coming into the light, telling their stories in various places, in church, on Facebook, wherever. It was a remarkable thing to behold. And I think that is a major reason why we have made dramatic changes in this problem.
And Dean, on the local level, I would imagine you're seeing some of the same things through, and I know you've only been with this particular organization for a year, but have, worked with other folks in this same arena. Are you seeing that same thing happening locally where more people are willing to, come out and talk about these things more openly?
I do, and I got to tell you, I would be remiss if I didn't say this. Right, when I hear Sam talks about when I hear him talk about the journalism side of the story, right, and he jumped into that rabbit hole and he went deep, and then you see kind of the process, and then you see the outcome. It gives me hope, right? Because again, I think that's what journalism truly is all about. And this is a guy who's written 2 books that allowed people to read, to open up their eyes, and then open up their hearts and their feelings to share, right? And you know me well enough, man. You show me a story and a good story, and we're off and running. And I just appreciate that so much from him. And again, I don't want to be like a fanboy, but man, I got a
Well, thank you,
crush.
Dean. So nice of you.
And so this is what I've seen, right? And I know where we started. I know where, Wake Up Carolina started with this one group, Creighton's House. And it was because Nancy shared with me 8 years ago, right? She was getting all these moms calling her to say, hey, I've got a 14-year-old, I've got a 15-year-old, I've got a 16-year-old. They're all struggling. Nancy didn't know them from Adam, right? What can we do? What can you do? How can we help them? And she knew that 12-step groups were tough for a 15, 16-year-old to walk into. And that's where they started Creighton's House. And that was the very first support group created for that age group, 14 and 19 in our state. And it still goes on today. And it's a place where they can come. It's a safe place. And when you talk about kids in that age group, they need a safe place because there's so many dangers out there, right? And so that really is where it started. And then you go back to our Overdose Awareness Day in Mount Pleasant. We just held our 8th one. And that was an opportunity for people to go online. You fill out, you give us a name of your loved one. We write your name on a luminary bag. If you would like to include like a social media post, we'll put a picture, we'll do some nice stuff. This year we had over 300 submissions in Mount Pleasant of names of people who lost a loved one, right? And it was more than I think 120 from last year.
Wow.
And then we did that in Berkeley County. We held our very first one with 35 people submit names. And we probably had 100 people come out. We had the police chief was here. The mayor spoke, just so supportive. Nancy spoke. And the overriding theme that night was, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful you did this for us because now we know we're not alone. Because a lot of times these families, they will sit and they will not extend and they will not go out and they will not talk about it because of the stigma, because of the guilt and the shame. And to watch these, 30 plus, 40 plus families all gather and find comfort in each other, I think it was it was like this roller coaster of emotion. I was like so happy and then I was so sad and then I was inspired. And then, but again, it was amazing. So yeah, what Sam is talking about is true. And we do see it on the local level. And I shared with Sam the other day, there's a part in Dreamland where he's like sitting at a bar or a restaurant or whatever, writing some thoughts. And somebody had said, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, you're not from around these parts. And they asked him what he was doing and he shared and they said, please sit down. And he sat and chatted with them. Right. And did they share their impact? I think that was what I got from that part of the story, Sam.
Yes, no, and I was there. I went to college at UC Berkeley. I had a big Berkeley um, hoodie on. It was very cold. It was New Year's Day, and I get up to leave, and Carol Wagner, who I later became friends with, didn't know at the time. She said, "Hey, you're not from around here." And I said, "No, I'm in town. I'm a writer." And she said, "Well, what you writing?" And I said, "Well, I'm writing a book about opioid painkillers and heroin." And the whole place just shut. It was deadly quiet. All you could hear was the football game on the TV. It was a tavern. And she said, "Well, I'm going to have to tell you a story." And she told me the story of her boy, Chad, who died of a heroin overdose from an addiction that began because he was given horribly, erroneously, a prescription for OxyContin, I believe it was, for carpal tunnel syndrome, which is in no way should be treated with opioids. And eventually, long story short, he ended up dying. So that was like my first day of research, literally New Year's Day of 2013.
Wow.
And so Christian, to piggyback on that, right, is that I spend time a lot of most days in Monk's Corner, and people will say they still think I'm on TV, right? And it's so
Right.
kind. And they'll come up and they go, "Hey, you're the guy from TV." I'm like, I'll introduce myself, and they'll say, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I actually left TV and I opened up this nonprofit down the street." And they say, "Well, what is it?" And I'll share with them. It's Wake Up Carolina. I'll share that I've been in recovery for 32 years, and this is what we do. And Christian, I'm telling you, every single person, and whether it's because they feel comfortable sharing with me because they watch me on TV for so long, or whatever the case is, every single one of them says, "My brother, my sister, my husband, my child, my neighbor, somebody in my church," right? And that is, and as Sam knows, right, that's a privilege and an honor that we get to sit and listen to their truth. Because as you know, Christian, we talked about this before, right? To be able to speak that truth is like that first step to freedom, right?
Yep.
And you know, and I'll say this too, and I know that she wouldn't mind me saying it because she'll say it Thursday, is that when she talked about getting Sam to come speak, she shared that Dreamland changed her life.
Mm.
Dreamland changed her life after Creighton's death. And again, no greater honor as a journalist or somebody who's telling somebody's story to hear that.
That's absolutely true, by the way. It's a humbling thing, and I've heard it many a time at the speeches I would give and so on, but it never ceases to be kind of this powerful, impactful thing to hear as a journalist.
Yep. And you know, and the thing too, Sam, is that it's the age group now, right? Is that it extends from the young to the very old. I
That's
mean,
right.
I did a presentation in one of our local high schools, and this 13-year-old girl came up to me at the end and said, "Thank you so much. This was really, I needed this." And I said, "No worries." And I said, "I'm just happy to be here." And then tears welled up in her eyes, and she said, "Because my daddy chooses drugs over me." And we were able to connect her with another young girl, 14, who's had impact that we work with, and they're going to communicate on the phone. So this girl didn't feel like she's alone. And then a year ago, I was at another high school, shared this girl had all the right questions, right? Asked all the right questions. And again, last person waited for everybody to leave, came up, said thank you, and I said no, thank you. Your questions were outstanding. I said, "Can I ask how you're so comfortable in asking these questions and knowledgeable?" And she said, "Because I overdosed last year, and I really think my mom could benefit from the moms group." And I swear to you, Christian, Sam, 3 days later, that mom walked into our mother's gathering group with about 20 other moms who have had impact.
Wow.
And again, that's how deep this thing runs now, right? Is that young people are comfortable talking about it.
I think it's a good point too that we talk about this topic. A lot of the focus, as it should be, are on the ones we've lost and how people can get to that point. But it also, you sometimes forget that it affects so many other people. This disease and moms, dads, brothers, sisters, everybody, friends. And you just kind of pointed that out that you had two young people who had completely different reasons for this interest or needing support, and it, like you both have said, It's across the country. It's everywhere. It's every age group. It affects everyone, and it's not just it's not just the person who is suffering or we've lost. It's in families. Everybody is dealing with this in different capacities.
Correct. And I would say that's one of the things that became glaringly clear to me right off the bat. Nobody in my family that I know of has addiction to opioids. I did not get into it for that reason. And so I didn't understand initially some of the nuances of it. And what I began to understand very quickly, I would say almost right off the bat, was that what you just said, Christian, which is that from every addict, there's a whole ripple of people around that person that is affected, and a neighborhood, a street, a business, a church, a school, whatever. It's a remarkable idea. And that's what makes it more potent than just simply the numbers of people who are addicted. There's this ripple effect around, and as you were saying earlier, that so many people for so long lived in utter silence. I remember when I was writing Dreamland, this one guy who had a son who was one of the few to speak about it in Ohio said, what you need to keep in mind through all of this is that all across this country, there are hundreds of thousands of people who have lost loved ones, who go to sleep every night in the dark, crying themselves to sleep, their arms around a photo album, and their biggest fear is that someone will find out how their child or husband or brother really died. And now I don't think that's quite as the problem that we face so much anymore. I think that so many more people are out front talking about it. More need to be, and it needs to be very normal, because addiction is normal. We all have the neuroscience, the brain chemistry to be addicted. Every human being has this. It needs to be as common as something that does or can affect every single human being. We've hidden it. We've segregated it. We've stigmatized it. It shouldn't be that way. We should be speaking about it very, very openly, very easily, because it is something that affects everybody.
Yeah, very well said. And I think just like anything else, education and acceptance and removing stigmas as best as you can is the first and biggest and probably most important step to getting towards a solution or better opportunities for people who may struggle with it. And certainly conversations like these or organizations like Wake Up Carolina are working to do those things.
I will tell you I heard a mom say one time, "Don't ask me how my son died. Ask me how he lived."
Mm.
Right? And just so much sense to me. It hit me really hard.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. I'm sure families go through. I mean, they may not be afraid to say what happened to their child, but may not want them to be known for that. They want the full scope to be out there, the full picture of who they were as a person. And that certainly makes sense as well.
Yeah, that's
Sam, you and
kind of what
I,
I was trying to do with Dreamland, and also with The Least of Us, was to try to tell stories of actually, in this case, people and to some degree communities who were in very small ways, but not inconsequential ways, were working to repair community. So the community was not just known as a Rust Belt area that lost factories and everyone and became a place with meth labs and stuff. It was about places that became known for finding paths forward by kind of rebonding with neighbors and people in the area.
Well, I could definitely talk about this for a long time. It's a very interesting conversation and topic. And I know a lot of people, as we've talked about, are affected by it. But unfortunately, we'll have to wrap it up. But before we do that, each of you, if there's anything else we didn't talk about that you would like to get out there, or if you simply just want to let people know where they can find information, that's fine. Whatever you'd like to do and say in these last moments.
Sam?
I would say, yeah, I'm on social media too much, probably. My website, though, is samquinones.com. That's SAMQUINONES.com. People can contact me there, and they can see where I'm on social media as well right there.
And then you can catch the Dean and Sam show this Thursday at Cooper River Room, which is Waterfront Park on the Mount Pleasant side of the bridge, under the bridge. You can go to wakeupcarolina.org. We've got a few tickets left, and that's what Sam wanted to do that, and I think it's a great forum, I think, and just to have a conversation. So he and I will just sit up on the stage and kind of banter back and forth like we've done today, like you and I did for years and years, and again, it could be a conversation that goes for a while, but we'll have lots of coffee and plenty of breakfast. So we hope to see you. It's 8 a.m., goes to about 10 a.m.
Sounds like it'll be a very good, informative morning for everyone. So definitely go get tickets. And all the links you guys mentioned will be in the show notes so people can just quickly click over. I really, really appreciate you both taking the time today to talk to me in general, but specifically about this topic too. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate your friendship, and thank you for having us.
My pleasure, Christian. Thanks so much for having us on.
And that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. A huge thank you again to Dean and Sam. It was great to be able to speak with both of them, specifically about this topic. As I mentioned, it's just something that affects everyone. And so it's great that I was able to have them on today. If you can make it on Thursday to the event, please do so. You can also support Wake Up Carolina via the link in the show notes. They have other things that you can do to support, including donating. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins with LMC Soundsystem for producing this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And also thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show. I am traveling, but fully intend to be back with you on Friday as usual. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any episodes in case there's any fluctuation with that release date. But regardless, I am already looking forward to being back and talking to you about things going on in Charleston. But until then, good night and good luck.